It's actually a pleasure having you here with us, Ben. And let me check the live stream, and then like the stage will be all yours.
Sure. Yeah, we can give it a minute to bed in.
Hey, Ben, you will
We-
rock.
Sorry?
You will rock your session, yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have some fun. Applications are so much fun, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that all applications are written very well. So they're very easy to work with. You may be able to detect some irony in my voice there. That was a great session, Damien. Just while we're waiting. I learned a lot.
Thank you, many thanks,
Good.
man.
Good session.
What
Yeah,
time is it for
it
you?
was actually an awesome session, Damien, taking through the PowerShell and things like that.
Thank you. What time is it for you guys?
I've just woken up. Well, I haven't. I've got 3 kids, so they woke me up hours ago. But it's 10:30 in the morning in the UK.
Okay. Me just 1 hour later.
Cool.
11.
So Ben, I have you in the live stream event, and the stage is all yours. It's a minute earlier than scheduled, but
It's okay. I'll talk slow.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, good morning. Welcome to track 1. It's been an excellent day. It's been a really good event. I've learned loads of stuff for the sessions that I've been able to catch up with. So hopefully I'm going to do justice with my session. My name is Ben Whitmore, for those who don't know me. I'm a senior cloud consultant for a company called Cloudway. You can catch me on Twitter @ByteBen. My DMs are open, so if there's any questions you get from this session and we don't answer them, or we don't answer them in enough detail, just reach out. I'm happy to help. So I've been an MVP, so this is my first year of award for MVP in enterprise mobility. So I work mostly with Intune, Config Manager, Azure AD, Windows 10 devices, all that good stuff. And one of the things I come across with customers is applications and the challenges they present as customers move from maybe the more traditional method of deploying apps from Config Manager to deploying them from Intune. So there's different ways you can do it. There's different ways you can deploy applications from Intune. And so I'm going to cover those on this session. And so hopefully that's going to be good fun and we're going to learn some stuff. So on today's agenda, we're going to split the session up into 3 parts. I wouldn't be doing this presentation justice if I didn't use PowerPoint. So for the first third of the presentation, we're just going to take a step back and we're going to see how applications were deployed in the kind of legacy world. So what options were available to us? Because I think it's important to understand how we used to do stuff, and then we can look at how we're going to do stuff in the modern world, and then just really understand that this is so much better for my customers and my users. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at that. And then for the second third of the presentation, we're going to focus on the options available to you today to deploy those applications for cloud managed devices, well, and on-premise devices as well, but specifically focused for cloud devices. And then the last third of the session, we're going to have a look at how we can maybe automate some of this application management. Okay, so none of us want to be creating applications manually if we can help it. Ideally, we want to pull in applications from packages that already exist, so maybe Store for Business, or maybe we've spent a ton of time developing applications in Config Manager. We don't really want to have to manually recreate all those again in Intune as maybe Win32 apps. So I'm going to rocket through at a fair pace the first 2 sessions in this agenda, the first 2 items, and then we're going to settle down maybe a bit of a slower speed and just dive into the lab have a look at some PowerShell and some automation. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. Okay. So we said we're going to start the session just by looking at how we used to do stuff. And as I said before, I think it's quite important to understand how we did do stuff, or maybe how we're still doing stuff, because we need to understand the challenges we've overcome. What have we put into place to be able to deploy applications today? Okay. And so the question I pose at the beginning of this slide here is, what lessons have we learned from the way we previously used to deploy stuff? And maybe have a look at how has Microsoft helped us maybe move from some of the really legacy way of deploying applications into maybe newer models, and where there's gaps. And if there's gaps, we need to fill those gaps. So let's start with an old friend of mine. I've been working in IT for 20 years. So I remember group policy was maybe one of the first options I had to deploy software to my devices. Okay. And so typically, if we're talking about how did we deploy software using group policy, well, we had really two options with group policy. We could assign software. So we just upload the MSI into group policy and assign it to our devices. And so then what happened is when the devices booted up and the users logged in, those applications would be installed. And it was very much just a kind of set it and forget it, you know, cross your fingers, pray, cross your legs that the application installs. There's no real kind of reporting that went on. You didn't really have any control over how that software was installed. So you had to be really, really good on your group policy management in order to get the software installed on different types of devices. Okay. And the second option we had with group policy was that we could publish software. So we could take the same MSI file and actually publish it to add remove programs in the control panel, and the user could manually install it from there. Okay. So that was kind of one of the first semi-automated ways we had of deploying software to endpoints. And I'm probably going to include login scripts in here as well, because I have seen customers use login scripts to deploy software, which I would strongly recommend against. But it's the similar kind of concept. You kind of had this distribution point, and I know some people actually use the net logon share to do this, where you chuck the software in there, and as part of the login script or a kick script, they would reference software and it would just install, and it's literally splat it, forget it. So we've come on a long way since those days, but that was one of the first ones that I remember. And so there's obviously a gap in deploying software reliably. So along comes Configuration Manager, or SMS, in this first iteration. And SMS 2003 brought us this concept of packages, which was really cool. So packages were, in my opinion, a welcome alternative to group policy. And they're still in use today. So it's a very, dare I say, old technology that came in with SMS 2003, but we still use it today, and it still has relevant use cases. So the idea of a package was we would take an area on a source share somewhere, chuck a load of files in it, and then use that area, that package, to then run a single program on our endpoint. And so we had a bit more control, because with packages, we could start to leverage distribution points in Config Manager. So we no longer had to deploy software using group policy and from the net logon share. We can then start to create disparate distribution points, replicate the content around our environment. All really cool. So we kind of had this leap in functionality. And as I said, packages are still in use today. We still see customers use them in task sequences. They're very good for one-off scripts. If you don't want to report on the success of software installation, packages are still ideal. I mean, one of my big bugbears with packages is that if you make them available to customers via the software center, there's no logo. I do not know why there's not a logo. I'm sure if Microsoft employed me, that would be my first priority. That's probably why they haven't employed me, to be honest. Anyway, we digress. So the packages are still available in Config Man today. And so Config Man, if I'm right in saying, is a 3-year supports life cycle. So they're here to stay, and they're still very much being used. But then as we move on through the ages, and not so far back now, we had Config Manager 2012, and we had this concept of applications. And applications were a vast improvement on packages. I'm talking kind of light years ahead now. And so we had the introduction of this idea of app detection method, which is really cool. So no longer were we just deploying software and hoping that it worked. We can now actually physically detect on the device whether it was installed or not. So we could look for an MSI code, we could search the registry, we could look for a specific file on the device, or we could run a custom script to bring back some information to tell us whether it's successful installation or not. So that is pretty cool. My favorite by far is icons in Software Center. Applications were a dream. You could suddenly start to really improve the user experience by having this catalog of software that looked pretty. Deployment types were another cool introduction with applications. So we could now say, well, I want to deploy this single application out there, but depending on the device and the conditions for that device, I want to do things slightly differently. So I could deploy a single application to my users and devices, and I could make the application behave differently depending on whether it was a 64-bit machine or a 32-bit machine and things like that. So deployment types are pretty cool. And we also had this introduction of requirement options, which again was amazing. So I could deploy software to, let's say I had an accountancy team. I could deploy a piece of software to accountancy, and I could say, well, I only want this software to install if it's a laptop. Okay, and so we could use requirement options for this. I mean, I've got an example on the screen here. Very simple PowerShell script just to look at the chassis type. If it wasn't a laptop, the software wouldn't install. So that was pretty cool. Another great introduction in the application model was supersedence, which needs no introduction. Essentially what happens there is I could supersede old versions of software. Okay, so if I have a new version of software come out, I could publish it to my users, and then I could either tell it to remove the old software or just replace the old software, depending on the type of MSI you had. That is pretty cool. And then we can customize the user experience with applications. So we can hide the program from the user entirely. We could install in the system context. We could install in the user context. So if we had applications that specifically needed to go into maybe the app data folder or the HTTP current user key, we could deploy that in the user context. And we could tweak some more things. So we could have a maximum allowed runtime for the application. And we could set an estimated installation time as well. So we could publicize that to the user in Software Center. So another great addition, application approval. So this means we could actually pre-deploy software to our users' devices, and then the user could request the application. And all the admin had to do from the Configuration Manager console was just go in and approve it. Okay, so there was no need then for admins to look at manually installing software or creating a new distribution group or a new collection to deploy applications to. So that was pretty cool. And then I think, yeah, we got one more on the list there. Reporting, absolutely miles apart from what we used to be able to do with group policies, logon scripts and packages. Okay, so that was really cool. So we saw that actually Microsoft have made some improvements in the way we could deploy applications. And so I just want to maybe mention briefly Package Conversion Manager, because to me, this shows that Microsoft were then saying, well, hang on a minute, we had customers using packages. We're now encouraging them to use applications, but there seemed to be this gap on how do I get from packages to applications. So the Package Conversion Manager helped us with this, and it actually helped us to convert packages into applications. And this was a feature that was built into the console. Very useful. I've used it on a couple of occasions, if not for anything else, just to help people initially go through that process of converting old legacy apps into applications. And then eventually you'd get enough confidence in building apps and applications manually, and packages would you'd see this swing from your packages list would decrease in Config Manager and the application list would increase. Okay, but to me that was testament that Microsoft were actually trying to help us. And that's a good point for us to remember later when we look at the newer methods available to us today. And I just popped the link on the slide there if you want to go and have a look at it, if you weren't already aware of the package conversion manager. So that's kind of how we did do stuff. And I think it was important just to spend a few moments on looking at that, because that can help us understand whether or not the options available to us today are better, and they are, okay? And even in this world of, we term it modern management, we can still leverage some of those technologies. So, I mean, if I give an example, I can have now co-managed devices in Config Manager. So I can have devices that are getting policy from Configuration Manager via the Config Manager agent, and I can have policies coming down from Intune through the MDM bridge. And so we have this idea of co-management. And on top of co-management, we can then build this idea of the CMG, the Cloud Management Gateway. And so what I can do is I can maybe say, well, I'm going through this pilot. I'm starting to try out Intune and maybe trying some of the more modern ways of deploying applications, which we'll come on to. But actually, I've got these really horrible applications in Config Manager that I spent years trying to develop. And I want to still continue using Config Manager to deliver those apps. And so with the CMG, we can still deploy applications from Config Manager to our internet-based devices. And we could use code management to manage the workloads. So we could switch the client apps workload across to Intune, which then meant we could deploy applications from both Config Manager and Intune. And so that is really cool. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that it doesn't have to be a big bang swap. We can do this gradually, move our application model across to Intune. And so this next slide, I just want to go through some of the options we have available today to deploy software from Intune. And the Microsoft Store is an interesting one. So we're kind of at this pivotal moment in the Microsoft Store history, where as we know it today, it's going to change. But essentially, the Microsoft Store, you make a link to Intune, and you're able to then associate applications for the Microsoft Store into Intune and then deploy them from Intune to your devices. And essentially what's happening is Intune is a glorified publisher for the store. So the applications are still actually coming from the Microsoft Store, unless you choose to download an offline bundle from the store and then import that into Intune as a line of business app. But essentially, we're just publishing apps for the store. But as I say, the store is changing. Microsoft is shifting their focus. So next year, we have the new store coming. And it's already been advertised that the store for business and store for education, as we know it, are maybe going to go entirely by 2023. And so the new store is going to come with new functionality. OK, and so we're going to be able to deploy more applications from the new store using Intune than we were before. So we can start to deploy things like Win32 apps, Universal or .NET applications, sorry, Universal Windows platform apps, Java apps, Electron apps, React Native apps, progressive web apps. Cool. I think, yeah, that's the end of my list. So we can start to use the store to deploy all these applications via Intune to our devices. That's really cool. And actually, I think I've got a slide for this as well. The big focus is going to be on Windows Package Manager and using the winget command line to install applications. But I think we're going to come on to that in a different slide. So it's going to change. I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but the way we used to do stuff, where we used to link applications from store to Intune and publish it, is going to change. So maybe start having a look at Windows Package Manager and the winget command line tool, because I think it's going to be really important. So it's good to have a heads up. OK, so that takes us on to another way to deploy applications from Intune, and that was using the Microsoft 365 apps model. OK, so essentially what we would do is we'd go to config.office.com and use the Office customization tool, which is a GUI-based tool to help us build out a configuration suitable for our environment. And that would then help us create an XML file. We download that XML file, and deploy it with the Office Click to Run service. Okay, so we can do that via Intune. We don't need to use custom scripts to do that. That feature is built in to Intune already. We could deploy Edge as well from Intune, although that's not necessarily a thing anymore because since Windows 10 20H2, Edge is built into the operating system. But we can still, and I see some customers don't really know what this is, but the My App Secure Sign-In extension is still a relevant extension to deploy using your configuration policies. So that helps users have a single sign-on experience to their Azure AD enterprise applications. Okay, so that's pretty cool. We can deploy web links from Intune. Let's not forget web links. And so the idea of web links is, you know, we maybe used to use group policy to add shortcuts to users' desktops to get to a corporate application. Well, web links are a similar concept. Just helps us deploy a shortcut into the company portal app. Some argue that it's actually a nice way to store all your web links and shortcuts in that kind of company portal experience. If you're telling your customers to go to the company portal for everything, why not stick your web links in there as well? Okay, so it's a relevant option from Intune. We're coming on to my favorite in a minute. So line of business apps isn't my favorite, but it's an option. So we're just going to discuss it quickly. So the idea here is with line of business apps, we can deploy a single file to our Windows devices. Okay, and that single file could be an MSI or an AppX package or an MSIX bundle, one of those in the list. But essentially, it's deploying a single file. And that was okay if we had to maybe take a single MSI as an example. But what if we had an MSI and an MST file? Well, some of the line of business apps weren't very suitable. Okay. And line of business apps are pretty much designed for those kind of in-house applications that you're building and deploying. I don't see them used much anymore. And to be honest, if you are using line of business apps, I'd maybe consider moving across to the Win32 app model, which we'll look at next. And just something to point out here as well is do not go mixing line of business apps with Win32 apps if you're using Autopilot. So with Autopilot, we can specify to hold up the enrollment status page or the user login until a list of applications is installed. And if you start deploying line of business apps and Win32 apps at the same time, you get into all sorts of trouble. So it's just a quick tip there to point out. Okay, so we mentioned this earlier, the Windows Package Manager. So again, keep your eye on this because this is going to, it's actually, there's about 2,500, well, there is 2,500 packages available today, and these are community built packages. So this is where people have gone out, packaged up maybe 7-zip or something, and create a package in the community, and you can use the winget command line tool to go and install that package. So there's an element of trust there. So you're trusting the package that somebody else has built, which is an interesting concept. So this is still being worked on, and I think it's going to be going live in 2022. The whole idea of public and private app catalogs available to us in Intune. So again, it's a move away from the store for business. So where the store for business has applications already built for you to deploy to your devices, this is the same thing. It's interesting to see what happens with those public packages though, and how much trust we put in them, or whether Microsoft are going to create their own list of packages. So yeah, watch that space. aka.ms/getwinget, get it installed and get testing. It's coming. Which kind of takes me on to where I kind of want to focus with this session. So we're pretty much at the end of the slides now, and we're going to jump into the labs. But Win32 apps is, I have a bit of a passion for them, and I liken these to the kind of move away from packages to applications in Config Manager. Win32 apps to me is the kiddie on the street to be looking at in terms of deploying applications from Intune, just because of the massive amount of customization and options we have with the Win32 app model. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on going through them because there's a lot of similarity in Win32 apps as there are with the application model in Config Manager. But essentially, we can leverage things like delivery optimization. If we have connected cache servers on distribution points in Config Manager, we can leverage those. We have multiple source files, so we no longer have to have a single MSI. We can bunch up a load of files. We can bunch up scripts, MSI files, MST files. We have to package them. So Win32 apps, we have to create a package to upload to Intune, which we're going to go through. But multiple source files, install and uninstall commands. We can install and use all the system context, same as applications. We can control the restart behavior, custom exit codes, and the list goes on. So requirements, we can say that if we're going to target a device with a Win32 app, it has to have a certain amount of disk space. It has to be a specific OS architecture. A minimum OS version has to have a certain amount of memory. So we can do that with the requirements. Detection rules were the same as the application model. So we could say, detect the applications installed by looking for an MSI code in the registry, or look for a registry key or a file on disk, or we could use a custom script to detect whether the software was installed okay or not. And we have dependencies, which kind of mean if you want to install application B, application A has to be installed first. So if you push application B out, application A will install as well. So dependencies were pretty cool. And we had supersedence as well. But I've gone through that at rate of knots because I want to spend time in the lab, because that's where we have fun, isn't it? So I'm going to focus on Win32 apps. And as I said just a slide or two ago, we have to take the source files that we intend to use for our Win32 app and package them up. And so Microsoft had this tool called the Win32 Content Prep tool that allows us to do this. And the idea is that we specify a source folder where our source files are for an application. So we're running the Intune WinApp util.exe, which is the Win32 Content Prep tool. We're getting a, let me just get my pen open here. So we're specifying the setup file, and the setup file is quite important. So we can specify an executable, a PowerShell script, a Visual Basic script, an MSI file, and we'll come on to this in a bit of detail later. But essentially, if you specify an MSI here, for example, when we import this package into Intune and start to create our Win32 app, it's going to pre-populate some of the information for us because it's actually getting that information from the database within the MSI file. But essentially, we pointed to our source files, call it a setup file, specify an output folder where we want the package to go, and it'll ask us if we want to create a catalog folder, which is really only comes into play if you're deploying apps to Windows 10 S mode. So generally, I don't see that. So we tend to say no here. And essentially what happens, this Win32 Content Prep tool will spit out a .IntuneWin file. So when we're in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, and we're maybe looking to add a new application, and we're looking to add a Win32 app, the first thing it asks us is to specify package file. Okay, so before we can even create the application in Intune, we have to create this package file. So let's just have a look at what that looks like. Cool. So let's jump into the lab. I've had enough of slides. So here's my lab. Okay, so we get the content prep tool. It's available on GitHub. Just go to GitHub and search for the Win32 content prep tool, and we can download it from here. Okay. So it downloads the Intune WinApp util.exe. And so essentially what we do is, if we're doing this manually, and we're not going to do it manually, we're going to automate this because our time is precious. But essentially, once I've downloaded that executable, just as we saw in the presentation, we need to specify where our source folder is. So here's a tip. What I'd recommend is when you're building Win32 apps, if you were to do it manually, give yourself some kind of folder structure to work with. Otherwise, you're going to have files all over the place. So what I tend to do for kind of small customers who don't really have the need for automation, I recommend maybe set up an input folder. Okay, so this is where all my source files are going to be for an application. So I'm going to take this example. So I've got Notepad++. I want to create a Win32 app for. So I'm just going to copy that, specify it as my source folder. I need to specify the setup file name. I can't skip that. I've only got one file, so I'm going to say, well, it's that. Then I need to specify an output folder. So this is where the folder structure comes in useful. So I have an output folder. It's that. And I don't need catalogs. I'm not doing Windows 10s mode, so I press no. And essentially what it's doing in a kind of one way of putting it is it's kind of compressing that file, spitting out this package. So I can now use this package when I'm in the Endpoint Manager Admin Center. When I go to select a package file, I can point it to that IntuneWin file. Okay. And then once I'd added the IntuneWin file, let me see if I've got actually an example of my disk I can use. No, I'll have to. I haven't got an example to show you. Let me see if I can create one on my disk quickly. Should have been prepared. Here we go. Do you have one? Just to show you. So I can look at my downloads folder. Got an IntuneWin file here. So this is Google Chrome that I'd packaged previously. So once I'd specified the package, I then have to go through manually and add in the application information. Okay. So you can see it's pulled in some information automatically here. So I believe that Google Chrome IntuneWin file that we created earlier was an MSI, so it's actually started to pull some of this information in for me. But essentially, this is still a very manual process. I have to go and grab my own logo from somewhere, so I'm going to have to search Bing or Google, search for a decent logo that hasn't got copyright on it. Yeah, it's just a very manual process. So what I want to show you is how we can automate some of this creation, because you don't want to have to go in and manually create these apps. It's a bit of a slow process. So the good thing about the IntuneWin app util is that you can pass parameters to it. So I can just open up PowerShell. So I can go to that one. We'll come to that in a minute. So there's the IntuneWin app util. Okay, so I can actually pass the following parameters to that file. I can pass the setup file using the S parameter. I can specify the input folder by passing the C parameter. I can specify the output folder by specifying the O parameter. Okay, so I can build a very basic PowerShell script. So let me just set the location. So all this PowerShell script is going to do is pass across the information that we just used to build that application manually. Okay, so if I run that, so all I'm doing is specifying the input folder into a variable, specifying the output folder into a variable as well, and I'm passing that information along with the setup file name to the tool. And it's actually gone and create the app for me. So that got me thinking. I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. We can start to automate app creation. Yeah. But the real key is that we've spent a long time building applications in Config Manager. We've gone through all that heartache. We've looked at how to install the thing silently. And, you know, if we couldn't do that, we had to use a script. And we just spent a lot of time collecting logos. So why not leverage that information? Okay, so my brain got thinking. I was like, well, can we get that information from Config Manager and pass it to the Intune WinApp util executable to start to build these apps automatically. And yes, you can. So we're going to show you that now. We're going to show you the different options available to do that. So I've been playing with this. It's a bit of a hobby of mine. It's in the PowerShell gallery. It's a module called the Win32 app migration tool. And essentially what it does, it makes a connection to your configuration manager site server, and it can pull back all the applications that you have, and it can start to take information for those applications and start to pass it through the Intune WinApp util executable. That's really cool stuff. And at the moment, we're still in beta, so we've got the PowerShell module published, and we can gather application details, we can gather deployment type details, we can grab content if you want to, we can grab logos, and we can create IntuneWin files. The next release for this module, we're going to have a config manager console extension, so you don't need to break out into PowerShell to do this stuff. You can do it direct from config man. And then when we come to general release, we're then actually going to go and create the Win32 apps in Intune. Okay, and I'm going to show you some options we have for that at the end of this session. But essentially, we're kind of still in beta, but that's still pretty cool stage to be at. So what I can do is I can pop into, as you know, you can go into the config manager console. And you can actually connect to PowerShell, so you can connect directly to your site server from here. So all that's going to do is open up PowerShell ICE with a connection to your site server. And so now we're connected to the site server, we can use this applet called get-cm application. Okay, if I was to just hit return there, it's going to pull back all the applications from my config man environment, which I don't really want it to do. So I'm going to maybe limit the applications it pulls back. So I think I've got, just grab a single file. Let's grab this one. Single application. Just copy that. So I'm going to say get CM application, localized display name. Okay, so that command is pretty cool. So it pulls back all the information I have about that application. And so I'm thinking, well, can I use this information to pass stuff to the Intune WinApp util file? And yes, you can. So there's a whole ton of information. So there's a lot of stuff there. I kind of want to dig through this and just get it the bits I need. Yeah, but essentially, we had the SDM package XML. So, and this contains all of the information you need to start to build your applications. So in here, it contains deployment type information, installation information, requirements, rule expressions. It actually also contains your logo in base 64. So then what I'm going to think to myself is, well, can I just select that single XML? So let's have a look. So I can go select object, expand property, SDM package XML. So then I'm just grabbing that XML that contains all the information, you know, kind of discounting all the other stuff. And I think I want to show, there we go. Wow, look at that. That's what I'm looking for. So you can see in here, I've got icon information. So it's actually displaying the icon information in base 64, which is pretty cool. So we'll have a look at that in a minute. So then, okay, Ben, so what? So we can get, what do we do with that? Well, let me create an object from this. Okay, so I'm going to say $XML equals. So then I have an object with that information in it. And it's really difficult to work with that. So I can start to deserialize the XML to make it a bit easier to work with. So I can say, I can create a new object called XML content equals, and let's deserialize it. So let's say, do that. So with this new object, it's a bit easier for me to work with. So I can have a look at the app management digest. And you can see I'm starting to get information back here in a much easier to read format than just a whole stream of XML data. So, okay, let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. Let's have a look at the application field. What's in there? Oh, cool. Look, I've got title. So what's in title? I can actually see the title there. How cool is that? So I'm starting to pull back information for this application. And then, so we saw the icon a minute ago. So can we see the icon? So let's maybe have a look in resources this time. Oh, there's the icon. Cool. Then I can actually have a look at the icon in raw base64 format. So that's really cool. And then what I can do, give me a sec, I can then maybe, just an example of what I can do with this data. So I can now say, well, let's try and export this icon from this base64. So let's create a new object called icon. And then I can say, well, let's convert that. So let's say, let's say $logo equals convert. So we'll use some .NET here. Let's convert and go from base64 string. And so the string we're going to use is $icon. Cool. And then I can just export that out using some more .NET. So I can say system.io.file, write all bytes, and then I can say specify an output path. So I'm just going to say ctemp logo.jpg, and then I want to export the $logo object. Cool. So now if I have a look in ctemp logo, cool. So there's my logo. That's pretty cool. So I can start to use PowerShell to grab the information from Config Manager and start to pump it out. And this is so cool in my opinion. So let's have a look at the Win32 app migration tool. So essentially, it's a PowerShell module you can install. So you can say install module Win32 app migration tool. So it's available in the PowerShell gallery. I already have it installed on this client. So what I can do is, here's one we baked earlier. I can say, this is the public function. There's the single public function, so it's very easy to use. So new Win32 app. So I have to connect to config-man to be able to get the information. So I need to pass my site code and provide a machine name. And then I can pass a parameter called app name. And I can use a wildcard here, or I can be specific. So let's just try a very basic command with the Win32 app migration tool. Okay, so I'm going to make a connection to my site server, and I'm going to try and pull back all applications because I've used the wildcard. So it's a verbose tool. It can actually show you everything what's happening on the output. So we can see here that it's creating folder structures, which is pretty cool. And then I have this list of applications it's got from config-man. So that's pretty cool. So let me just pick one of these. Let's go for Notepad. So it processes the application. And because I didn't pass any other parameters to the tool, it's not done anything with the information rather than gather some details for the application. So I can have a look in the Win32 app migration tool folder, which by default is created on the C drive. You can specify another location as well. But I can come into here and I've got a whole host of stuff to look at. I've got a log file, which tells me everything that's going on. So we've got some verbose login for troubleshooting, which is pretty cool. And we've also got this details folder. So as I said before, this is still in beta. So we're just going to pull back this information so we have it to hand to manually build our Win32 apps. So I can look at the deployment type information. So this is the deployment type information. I've actually pulled back a Patch My PC application, which is pretty cool. So I can see their name in here. So the deployment type installation command for this app was a Patch My PC script runner. So those folks are awesome with their products. If you don't already know about it, But you can see I'm starting to pull back the information I need to build my Win32 apps. So that's cool. So not that impressive though, Ben. What else have you got up your sleeve? Well, let's have a look at something else. Let's use another parameter. So maybe I want to say export logo. Okay. So again, I can select, let's select a single application, Notepad++. Okay, so it's done a little bit more this time. So it's now actually exported the logo and it's told me the folder it's exported it to. So it's used the icon ID as the folder name. So I can look at my logos folder. So that's the icon ID for that application. And there we have a logo. Cool. Okay, Ben, it's getting better, but it's still not that great. What else can it do? Well, now I can actually say, and this is really cool, I can say package apps. So this parameter will actually go and build that IntuneWin file. Okay. So again, we just select the application. Okay, so it's done a whole load of stuff there, but you can see what it's also done is popped up that IntuneWin app util executable, and you can see it's packaged that file for us, and it all happened very quick. It's all very exciting. But if I have a look at some of this verbose output and show you what's going on under the hood, essentially it's gone and found the content source folder. So we're grabbing content source. We're not actually grabbing the data from the database. So the information in your content source has to be up to date and accurate. But then what it's also doing, if you cast your mind back to when we ran the IntuneWin app util manually, we had to specify a setup file name. Well, what this module does, it actually finds the appropriate file name for the application and specifies it for you. Okay, and so if there was an MSI in the source folder, it would use the MSI because it will then it'll populate more information in Intune when we're building the app. But it's going to find that for you and detect it and add it to the script. And then it gives you some more information about what it's doing. So here it's actually building the Intune Win32 app. If I can show you here, if I can zoom it correctly. So we're starting to pass those parameters like the -s parameter, the -c parameter, and the -o parameter. Okay. And then it tells you it successfully created a .IntuneWin file. And again, we come to our folder structure and look in the Win32 apps folder. And it's created a .IntuneWin file. And it'll create a .IntuneWin file for each deployment type for the application. Pretty cool. Okay, Ben, I'm not impressed. Show me some more magic. Well, okay. The whole point of this module is so that we can automate lots of applications. So let's try doing lots of applications. Well, let's do 4 or 5. So let's pick 7-zip, Acrobat, Chrome. Let's go for Notepad++ again, maybe WinSCP. Okay, so I've held down the control key in this outgrid view, multi-select, press OK. You can see here it's putting that information through to the module. It's going off to config man, getting the information it requires to build these applications. Obviously, Acrobat is a fairly big package compared to the others, so it's taken a little while to build that one. So that's going to disappear in a minute. Let that run through. Need a new SSD. So the idea is you kind of just set this and forget it and walk away and get a coffee. But essentially what's going on is, if we go back to our Win32 app migration tool folder, we can see now it's starting to spit out all these applications as .IntuneWin files. So this folder structure name is presented within the details CSV files. So it tells you the locations for the specific applications and the specific deployment types. So it's pretty cool. But all those applications I've selected, I now have a logo exported for each of those applications. So I've got Chrome there, Adobe. So let's just put in all this set of config man. If I go back in the details folder now, it's going to have even more information because I've just pulled back more applications. Let's give me stuff like app name, app description, icon file names, things like that. So this is really cool. And when I've got 3 kids and a full-time job, and so when I get time, I like to focus on this, and we really want to revamp up to the next release cycle where we take this module as it is and create a config manager extension, so we don't need to break into PowerShell to do it. But then ideally, the ultimate goal is to actually start creating these apps in Intune. And so a good friend of mine, Nikolai Anderson, he's an MVP in enterprise mobility. He actually has a framework which does that. So the Intune Win32 app module, he is actually creating those apps in Intune. He's not pulling them from config manager. He's able to pull data from websites. So download the files, package them up, and then create them in Intune. So what we're thinking of doing is getting our heads together. So we'll refine my module to pull the data out of config man, merge it with his framework to then create the application in Intune, because I'm a great believer in not reinventing the wheel if we can help it. And so hopefully we're going to come up with a community solution that will do that end-to-end process and help you migrate the application you have in config manager and build them in Intune. Everybody's happy. IT admin sits back, hands on the head, drinks some coffee, and we're not having to manually build applications. And I think that's all I had to say on the subject. So happy to take any questions. I'll pop across to the Q&A and see what we have there. Hopefully that was useful. For those who maybe haven't looked at Win32 apps before and didn't really understand the concept of the content prep tool, hopefully I've shown you some things that spark some interest. As I said, I'm on Twitter @ByteBen, so if you've got any questions, reach out. More than happy to help. Let me just take a look at the Q&A. Okay, so there's a question here. Is the automation tool limited to run only executable file extensions? No, you can run anything, pretty much. So XEs, Visual Basic scripts, PowerShell. So if you just want to publish a single PowerShell script, the content prep tool can package that up. So that's pretty cool. Any other questions I missed on there? No, so I mean, the question there, I guess, as I said, the Win32 app, you can have multiple source files. So you put in your MSI and your MST, and if you've got a PowerShell script that you use to install the application as well, if it's a complex one, you just put all 3 in the source content folder, package up as a Win32 app, and then when you're in Intune, instead of specifying like an MSI exec command line, you would specify PowerShell. So you'd say PowerShell.exe. So this is if you were using PowerShell script as your main setup file. So PowerShell.exe. Then you'd maybe want to set the execution policy and then point it to a file. So okay, that's quite versatile.
That was quite an amazing session, Ben, and very enthusiastic, very information filled, and I hope the attendees liked it. To be honest, it was great.
Awesome. Well, the good thing about doing it virtually is people can't throw stuff at you. So even if it wasn't to some people's liking, then I'm safe. It's all good.
Yes, that's true.
I'll hang around to if there's any questions pop in Q&A, I'll hang around and answer those. But thanks for inviting me on. It's been an awesome morning. I really enjoyed talking about this stuff.
Yes, and it's a real pleasure to have you here with us on this event. And thanks for doing the presentation.
My pleasure.